hope you can see me well. I guess if you can't, I won't be posting this video, but I wanted to try something for a little bit. Just felt really called to be a storyteller, even if it isn't my own story, but maybe eventually, tell my own story. We'll see what this becomes, if it becomes anything, if it transpires into more, but we're gonna start with Black Beauty, and I'm just thinking I'm gonna read a chapter or two every day. And if you like to listen to books, would love to invite you to follow along. And if you don't like to listen to books, I don't get it, but you do you, boo. Yeah, let's read a book together. So the foreword. No one forgets Black Beauty, for Black Beauty helps children grow up. In stressing the need for compassion towards horses, the author Anna Sewell makes us aware of the best that we ourselves can be. We identify with Black Beauty's courage by feeling his emotions, from his loving happiness to his struggle against despair. We are led through the engrossing experiences of his life, his moments of high adventure, as well as of uncomplaining endurance, for a horse never knows who may buy him. It is all a chance for us. In this edition, we are lucky to have Lucy Kemp Welch's color illustrations, first published in 1915. The deep tenderness of many of her paintings expresses the heart of the story, and through her varied compositions, she highlights the telling moments in dramatic situations. She is, in addition, a master of line drawing. Her portrait of each horse captures the essence of that horse's personality. We see the sensitivity of the author perfectly mirrored by that of the illustrator. This story makes us ponder what it is that makes us human. Black Beauty himself is many of the things we would like to be, true to ourselves, resolute and high-spirited, yet sweet-tempered. We are reminded of our responsibility toward the creatures of the earth through the vividness with which Black Beauty, as well as his closest friends, Ginger and Merrylegs, relate their stories. People reveal themselves fully to the animals entrusted to them. Black Beauty says of his first coachman, John Manley, "I did not understand all he said, but I learned more and more to know what he meant." And horses are what people make of them. Ginger's harsh and lovely early training takes its toll. Loveless early training takes its toll. The Ginger that we first meet is distrustful and skittish. Anna Sewell believes strongly that when a person mistreats an animal, he harms his own character as much as, or more than, that of the animal. The author's message is stated by one of the people in her story who says, "If we see cruelty or wrong that we have the power to stop and do nothing, we make ourselves sharers in the guilt." Anna Sewell knew about suffering firsthand. Born in 1820, she was crippled by the accident in her childhood and spent most of her life in pain. Though she sometimes had difficulty standing, she was able to drive a horse and carriage. As a young adult, she drove her father daily to the train station, and it was then that she developed her abiding concern for the welfare of horses. No one was to hear Anna Sewell complain of her own pain, though she had deep compassion for the suffering of others. In Black Beauty, she writes, "We have no right to distress God's creatures without a very good reason. We call them dumb animals, and so they are, for they cannot tell us how they feel, but they do not suffer less because they have no words. Anna Sewell's story remains in our memory because we identify so strongly with both the animal and human characters whose personalities are portrayed through vivid action. Because the many and varied events of the story are presented from a horse's viewpoint, they attain a novel power. We feel Black Beauty's panic in the face of fire, for danger seemed to be all around. We share the animal's shock at their first experience of a hunt and see how a war horse's gay bravery on entering battle turns into something else. I trembled as I had never trembled before. But we also enjoy the loving warmth that envelops Black Beauty when he is cared for by the merry family of a cab driver. Through the author's clear, crisp writing, the incidents are indelibly imprinted on our hearts. Though we may each carry with us a different memory of Black Beauty, we will surely be touched by it. Ellen S. Shapiro, New York City. She wrote that in 1986. Anna dedicated this to my dear and honored mother, whose life, no less than her pen, has been devoted to the welfare of others. This little book is affectionately dedicated. First chapter is called My Early Home. Let's see if you can see this drawing that she's done. Part 1, Chapter 1. The first place that I can well remember was a large, pleasant meadow with a pond of clear water in it. Some shady trees leaned over it, and rushes and water lilies grew at the deep end. Over the hedge on one side, we looked into a plowed field, and on the other we looked over a gate at our master's house, which stood by the roadside. At the top of the meadow was a plantation of fir trees, and at the bottom a running brook overhung by a steep bank. Whilst I was young, I lived upon my mother's milk, and I could not eat grass. In the daytime I ran by her side, and at night I lay down close by her. When it was hot, we used to stand by the pond in the shade of the trees. When it was cold, we had a nice warm shed near the plantation. As soon as I was old enough to eat grass, my mother used to go out to work in the daytime, and come back in the evening. There were 6 young colts in the meadow besides me. They were older than I was. Some were nearly as large as grown-up horses. I used to run with them and had great fun. We used to gallop all together round and round the field as hard as we could go. Sometimes we had rather rough play, for they would frequently bite and kick as well as gallop. One day, when there was a good deal of kicking, my mother whinnied to me to come over to her, and then she said, "I wish you to pay attention to what I am going to say to you. The colts who live here are very good colts, but they are cart horse colts, and of course they have not learned manners. You have been well bred and well born. Your father has a great name in these parts, and your grandfather won the cup 2 years at Newmarket races. Your grandmother had the sweetest temper of any horse I ever knew, and I think you have never seen me kick or bite. I hope you will grow up gentle and good and never learn bad ways. Do your work with a good will. Lift your feet up well when you trot, and never bite or kick, even in play." I have never forgotten my mother's advice. I knew she was a wise old horse, and our master thought a great deal of her. Her name was Duchess, but he often called her Pet. Our master was a good, kind man. He gave us good food, good lodging, and kind words. He spoke as kindly to us as he did to his little children. We were all fond of him, and my mother loved him very much. When she saw him at the gate, she would neigh with joy and trot up to pet him. He would pat and stroke her and say, "Well, old Pet, how is your little darky?" I was a dull black, so he called me Darky. Then he would give me a piece of bread, which was very good, and sometimes he brought a carrot for my mother. All the horses would come to him, but I think we were his favorites. My mother always looked took him to the town market day. Excuse me. My mother always took him to the town on a market day in a light gig. There was a ploughboy, Dick, who sometimes came into our field to pluck blackberries from the hedge. When he had eaten all he wanted, he would have what he called fun with the colts, throwing stones and sticks at them to make them gallop. We did not much mind him, for we would gallop off, but sometimes a stone would hit and hurt us. One day he was at this game, and did not know where the master was in the next field, but he was there, watching what was going on. Over the hedge he jumped in a snap, and catching Dick by the arm, he gave him such a box in the ear as made him roar with the pain and surprise. And soon as we saw the master, we trotted up nearer to see what went on. "Bad boy," he said, "bad boy," to chase the colts. "This is not the first time nor the second, but it shall be the last. There, take your money and go home. I shall not want you on my farm again." So we never saw Dick any more. Old Daniel, the man who looked after the horses, was just as gentle as our master, so we were well off. The next chapter is called The Hunt, and it's only a few pages as well, so we'll read that. But here's the picture. The Hunt. Before I was 2 years old, a circumstance happened which I have never forgotten. It was early in the spring. There had been a little frost in the night, and a light mist still hung over the plantations and meadows. I and the other colts were feeding at the lower part of the field when we heard, quite in the distance, what sounded like the cry of dogs. The oldest of the colts raised his head, pricked his ears, and said, "They are the hounds," and immediately cantered off, followed by the rest of us to the upper parts of the field, where we could look over the hedge and see several fields beyond. My mother and an old riding horse of our master's were also standing near, and seemed to know all about it. "They have found a hare," said my mother, "and if they come this way, we shall see the hunt." And soon the dogs were all tearing down the field of young wheat next to ours. I never heard such a noise as they made. They did not bark, nor howl, nor whine, but just a yo, 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 woo, yo, yo, woo, woo, at the top of their voices. After them came a number of men on horseback, some of them in green coats, all galloping as fast as they could. The old horse snorted and looked eagerly after them, and we young colts wanted to be galloping with them, but they were soon away into the fields lower down. Here it seemed as if they had come to a stand. The dogs left off barking and ran about every which way with their noses to the ground. "They have lost the scent," said the old horse. "Perhaps the hare will get off." "What hare?" I said. "Oh, I don't know what hare. Likely enough it may be one of our own hares out of the plantation. Any hare they can find will do for the dogs and men to run after, and before long the dogs began their yo, yo, woo, woo again, and back they came all together at full speed, making straight for our meadow at the part where the high bank and hedge overhang the brook. "Now we shall see the hare," said my mother. And just then a wild hare with fright rushed by and made for the plantation. On came the dogs. They burst over the bank, leapt the stream, and came dashing across the field, followed by the huntsmen. 6 or 8 men leapt their horses clean over, close upon the dogs. The hare tried to get through the fence. It was too thick, and she turned sharp round to make for the road, but it was too late. The dogs were upon her with their wild cries. We heard one shriek, and that was the end of her. One of the huntsmen rode up and whipped off the dogs, who would soon have torn her to pieces. He held her up by the leg, torn and bleeding, and all the gentlemen seemed well pleased. As for me, I was so astonished that I did not at first see what was going on by the brook. But then, when I did look, there was a sad sight. 2 fine horses were down. One was struggling in the stream and the other was groaning on the grass. One of the riders was getting out of the water, covered with mud, and the other lay quite still. His neck is broke, said my mother. And serve him right too, said one of the colts. I thought the same, but my mother did not join with us. Well, no, she said, you must not say that. But though I am an old horse and have seen and heard a great deal, I never yet could make out why men are so fond of this sport. They often hurt themselves, often spoil good horses, and tear up the fields, and all for a hare or a fox or stag, and they could get more easily some other way. But we are only horses and don't know. Whilst my mother was saying this, we stood and looked on. Many of the riders had gone to the young man, but my master, who was watching what was going on, was the first to raise him. His head fell back and his arms hung down, and one looked very serious. There was no noise now. Even the dogs were quiet and seemed to know that something was wrong. They carried him to our master's house. I heard afterwards that it was young George Gordon, the squire's only son, a fine, tall young man, and the pride of his family. There was now riding off in all directions to the doctor's, to the farrier's, and no doubt to the Squire Gordon's to let him know about his son. When Mr. Vaughan, the farrier, came to look at the black horse that lay groaning on the grass, he felt him all over and shook his head. One of his legs was broken. Then someone ran to our master's house and came back with a gun. Presently there was a loud bang and a dreadful shriek, and then all was still. The black horse moved no more. My mother seemed much troubled. She said she had known that horse for years, and his name was Rob Roy. He was a good, bold horse, and there was no vice in him. She never would go to that part of the field afterwards. Not many days after, we heard the church bell tolling for a long time, and looking over the gate, we saw a long, strange black coach that was covered with black cloth and drawn by black horses. After that came another and another and another, and all were black, while the bell kept tolling and tolling. They were carrying young Gordon to the churchyard to bury him. He would never ride again. What they did with Rob Roy I never knew, but 'twas all for one little hare. Pick up on chapter 3 tomorrow. It's called My Breaking In. If you watched the whole video, thank you so much for staying with us. I think, we'll read a couple chapters a day of Black Beauty, see how that goes. I've got a couple others. I think we might do Peter Pan next or something like that. Of course, if you have a request, just let me know. We'll try and do what we can and see how it goes. But for now, I'm going to go read a little bit more of a book that my friend Palmer lent me, The List of Things That Will Not Change. And I'll see you tomorrow.